Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Busboys and Poets Books Presents. We are thrilled to be exploring some kind of more taboo topics that we don't get to really necessarily talk about the everyday. So today we are really pleased to present Compersion, Polyamory, and the Future of Relationship Diversity. My name is Lori. I'm the Director of Operations for Busboys and Poets Books. And part of a whole shtick is really focusing on and spotlighting marginalized voices and authors. And for today, you'll notice to my, I don't know if it's actually on screen that way, but to my right or not, directions are hard, is an ASL interpreter. So thank you so much to Billy Sanders for tonight for interpreting. We are going to be talking about a lot of things, polyamory and compersion. And you're probably wondering, what is compersion? Is it the opposite of jealousy, as it's usually believed? An emotion, behavior? What causes it to happen and bloom? What can we learn about it, or at least invite more of it into our lives? ? We are really excited to be joined by some folks who can actually give some answers to that question and more about polyamory, relationship diversity, intimacy, and what it means to kind of go outside the box, away from more traditional monogamous relationships. I am thrilled to be introducing Dr. Marie Thouin, who goes by she, her. She's a leading expert on the topic of compersion, positive empathy, and the author of the groundbreaking book, What is Compersion? Understanding Positive Empathy and Consensually Non-Monogamous Relationships. She's published seminal research studies, the first ever encyclopedia entry on compersion, and is the creator of whatiscompersion.com, a popular website that features her research, blogs, and other resources on compersion. She's also the founder of Love Insight, a mindful dating and relationship coaching practice where she supports people of all backgrounds in creating intentional and vibrant love lives. Her work on compersion and mindful dating has been featured in several magazines and podcasts, including Elle, The Savage Lovecast, and Multi-Amory. She believes in the power of conscious love to create a better world. Joining her tonight is author Evita Loca Sawyers, she, her, who is a Black, queer, polyamory, non-monogamy educator, speaker, coach, content creator, and author of Polyamory Devotional. So wearing multiple hats here, like one does in a poly household. The subject of the documentary, Poly Love, she's passionate about helping people navigate the transition from monogamy to non-monogamy and avoiding the common beginner pitfalls. She's also the creator of today's Polyamory Reminder, daily snippets of wisdom for living non-monogamously. She has been featured in several articles and podcasts, including Vice, Yahoo.Life, that's a new one, and the Multi-Amory podcast, to name a few. Her voice is frank, candid, pragmatic, and vulnerable. She is known for her balanced approach to polyamory concepts and for embracing her humanness as a non-monogamous person. Let's please go ahead and give a warm welcome to Dr. Marie Thouin and Erita La Vida Loca Sawyers. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
It's good to be here.
It is wonderful to be here. I'm grateful to be here and talking about this topic, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I was thinking we would start with talking about your book, Evita, if that's still all right with you.
Sure.
And I'd love to tell people a little bit about how we met, actually, because we met when I was writing my book on compersion, and I wanted to interview more people. You know, I started with my dissertation. I interviewed about 20 people then, and then I wanted to have a more diverse folk group to interview about that. And someone recommended I talk to you, and we just had the most epic conversation about compersion. And I was just struck by your wisdom and just how you were able to go so deep into concepts relating to polyamory and spirituality and intersectionality, all in one conversation. I just really was so odd. And then in the time that I interviewed you, you were also in the midst of writing your polyamory devotional, which I'm so in love with. And I would love to start asking you just kind of what was the origin story of your book? Like, what led you to write this?
It actually was a COVID experiment rather, that, turned into a book that I published. I would occasionally write things online about polyamory. By that time I had a public page, but it wasn't anything that I was really doing anything with. And then COVID happened and we're all stuck in the house. And so I challenged myself to see if I could come up with a polyamory wisdom a day, and see if I could get 365 of them. And then if I got 365, I would comprise them into like a book of these little snippets of daily wisdom. Back when I used to practice Christianity, some of the books that I really enjoyed were devotionals. So just little snippets of wisdom that you could sort of reflect on as a daily practice. And there was another book too that I really enjoyed like that, called The Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. And it's the same thing, just these daily snippets of wisdom. And so I thought, oh, I wonder if I could do one for polyamory. And so I began posting these little daily snippets and, trying to compile 365 of them. And when I actually went and pitched the idea to Thornapple, as a book, and they accepted it, and then I had to turn it in. I didn't have a full 365. I still had about like 40 that I had to write, and so I had to go into like intentionally writing them. But that's really where I took off, was I would just put these out every day. Can I come up with something to write every day? And that's kind of where I gained traction. And then I just comprise them all and place them into a small book. I like the idea of a devotional because we have busy lives. And I love to read, and I still find a struggle to find time to read. And so I like the idea that this is something that people can go to and just, devote a little bit of time a day to read. They can read it once a week. They can go to it and just go, universe, guide me, and flip open a page, and read something on the page. And so I kind of like this idea of a book as opposed to something that you have to read from start to finish. This is something that you can kind of choose your own adventure with. And I do possess the ability to say these really kind of deep and profound things in these very small, frames, kind of cut to the chase. Mm-hmm. And so that's why, I chose this format.
I love it. Yeah, that's exactly how I've been using it. It's just like flipping through and being like, okay, what do I need to read today? And like, wow, boom, truth bomb. Oh, so I'm curious, what would you say to you is at the intersection of spirituality and polyamory?
And we actually just talked about this in the live that we did, which I loved.
Uh-huh.
We had such a great conversation, but so the intersection of my polyamorous journey and my spiritual journey, they sort of, converged upon one another. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I tell people all the time that, you often hear the term God is love, and when I say God, I just mean the divine, the bigger, part that's outside of us. So however you conceptualize that is up to you. I don't mean like, God, the white man bearded in the sky. That's not what I mean, but, like that concept of the divine. And we often hear that, God is love. And so polyamory caused me to have to reconcile my relationship to love, which essentially is me reconciling my relationship to the divine. What do I believe I'm worthy of in the context of love? Who do I want to be in love? Who do I want people to be in love to me? How do I want to love the people in my lives? How do I want to be loved by them? And what do I want to say about my experience of love, both in the love that I give and the love that I receive? And in doing all of that work and reconciling my relationship to it, doing a lot of healing, doing a lot of bringing those concepts and those ideas that I kind of had baked in forward and going, how much of this is actually how I genuinely think and feel, and how much of this is things that have been just told that that's what I'm supposed to think and feel and be in relationships. And then also how much of these things that I think and feel are serving what I know I actually want to do. And so, yes, I may think and feel that, I don't know, I needed to be, exclusive with a person in order to feel special, but that wasn't really reflective of how I wanted to be in relationships and how I wanted to show up to the people in my life and how I also wanted people in my life to show up to me. And so I began to realize, I began to see this sort of like, you know, like I said, this kind of merging of my spiritual healing and my development, and juxtaposed against, you know, me developing as a non-monogamous person and learning how to love the people in my life in a much more free way. And in a way that felt much more authentic to like how I wanted to be in relationship with others. And there was a lot of deep healing that needed to be done, because I noticed that a lot of the things that showed up in ways I wanted to control the people I was in relationship with, and ways that I wanted them to show up to me, you know, a lot of that stuff was motivated and propelled by a lot of wounds, you know, and a lot of things that I experienced throughout the course of my life that, you know, was me trying to avoid pain, you know, trying to avoid fear, trying to avoid feeling threatened, trying to avoid abandonment. And in learning how to heal those things so that I could, you know, love the people in the way that felt most authentic to me, it kind of did this deeper work of really healing the relationship with myself. Because a lot of that is healing the relationship to yourself, learning how to be kinder to yourself, learning how to believe that you're worthy of love, learning how to believe that, you know, people really care about you and they're not going to leave you, you know, because they're off with someone else, you know. And so a lot of that healing showed me, you know, that for me, you know, polyamory was very much a spiritual practice.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, and it actually reminds me of our conversations we had about compersion, you know, like this idea of not only, you know, like being polyamorous in your behavior, but actually like bringing your emotional life in alignment with those values of freedom and emancipation and liberation. And that kind of layered with the conversations we've had about intersectionality and race. I'm wondering if you'd want to talk about just like the intersection of your racial identity as a Black woman and your polyamorous journey.
Yeah, so I remember when you first reached out to me to, you know, talk about your research and contribute, and you asked me that question, you know, did I see any sort of, you know, parallels or any sort of connection between, you know, my race and, you know, compersion? And I thought it was such a strange question. Like, I was like, what? You know, I don't even know how to answer this. But when I sat and I thought about it, you know, we hear so much now, you know, decolonization is such a buzzword, you know, decolonization, decolonize, you know, your relationship to yourself, your relationship to others, your relationship to the earth. And, you know, this is a big movement. You know, what does decolonization work look like? I noticed that, you know, for me, decolonization, you know, is a lot more about just decolonizing the things that we do. It's also about decolonizing the ways that we think and feel. And so, you know, when I think of compersion, the idea that I can experience happiness and joy about my partners being fulfilled and loved and well cared for by other people in similar ways that I care for them, in some ways that I don't. You know, to me, that idea like flips on its head the dominant cultural idea around romantic and sexual relationships, in that I am supposed to be the sole source of this person's fulfillment in this way. And if I'm not, or if they're choosing others to fulfill them in similar ways, then you should feel upset about that. You should feel jealous about that. You should have a problem with it. Like, these are all ideas that have been placed in our mind because of the dominant cultural theme of how we should be in relationships with one another. And so when I think about the idea of compersion and sort of intersectionality and my, you know, identity as a Black woman, I'm like, how are the ideas that I've been given from white supremacy, from cis heteronormativity, from mononormativity, from, you know, ableism, all of these things, you know, what are these ideas that these things have deposited in my mind via relationships? And how am I seeking these things out and uprooting them and replacing them with different models that are more reflective of like how I want to be in relationships with others? And to me, that is liberatory practice. That's radical work. You know, I don't want these systems to only, you know, to just not dictate what I do. I also don't want them to dictate what I think and feel. And so it's to me, it's doing the deeper work of going, okay, how are these things functioning on me internally that shape how I move through the world? And where are ways where, you know, I need to uproot or I need to change? Like I said, I need to replace them with things that are much more genuine to how I wish to be in relationship to myself, to the world, to my life, to others.
Oh man, that's so beautiful. And I feel like in your book, you really talk about how to do that internal work of uprooting those narratives. Like that's
Right.
really what it is.
Yeah, and the thing is, I tell people all the time, some of the things that you come up with, they may be true for you. For me, it's more about making sure that we're being authentic and genuine about the ways in which we wish to be in relationship with people. Because some of the, you know, the ideas that you've received from the dominant culture may actually be like, no, that's actually how I really feel, you know? But I guarantee you that there are a lot that aren't, you know? And we don't do a lot of intentional sort of checking in with ourselves and going like, hey, like, is this true for me? Is it true for me that, you know, I should feel jealous, you know, if my partner is with someone else? Is that true for me? Is it true that, you know, the only way for me to feel special is by being exclusive with a person? You know, is that true for me? You know, is it true for me that I want to have, you know, the final say on like who my partner gets to experience and how? You know, is that true for me? And, you know, and I found that as I began this journey and I began to ask myself those questions, some of my answers were yes, but a lot of them were no. You know, I was like, no, you know, that's not really true for me, or, you know, I don't really need that. And so I always tell people that, you know, my work is not to build an army of Vitas, you know, that think and feel the way I do. My work is really for people to ask themselves, like, who am I? What do I want? What do I think and feel? And then how do I develop the tools and the ability to communicate that to the people around me so that I find my aligned tribe, people that want to be in relationships in the way that I want to be in relationships. And then also that I am equipped with the tools to be able to show up to my desires and have them well.
That's beautiful. And I love the way you phrase that question, is that true for me? You're not just asking like, well, is it true? Because we all get to have our own truth. We have many different truths. And to actually like do the work of asking like, well, is that true for me? Is this how I want to navigate relationship? That is to me not just a relationship journey, but it's a life journey. It's like transformative for every part of your life.
Yeah, it really is. You know, polyamory has really changed how I'm in relationship with every human being that I interact with, from my children to a stranger on the street, you know, to my coworkers. It really caused me to like go, how am I showing up to the humans in my life? You know, where are areas where I am, you know, trying to control or limit or, you know, set a person up to, you know, behave towards me in a way that isn't really reflective of who they want to be and how they want to be in relationship with me, but is about keeping me comfortable, keeping me feeling safe, you know, whatever. And so it's changed me as a parent, you know, it's changed me as a friend, it's changed me as a human being, you know, relating to other human beings. And, you know, I'm grateful for that. And, you know, I think sometimes in non-monogamy, you can kind of hear that and we can see, okay, well, non-monogamy is the only way to do that. Absolutely not. You know, it's one way to do that, you know, and then it's authentic for me. And I was able to do that, you know, through my non-monogamous journey. But, you know, for me, it's really just about how are we engaging in our relationships in a conscious and intentional way, and learning how to do that.
Yeah, and to bring it back to our theme of relationship diversity, to me, it's like, yes, if we're going to value freedom and other people's freedom to create the relationships they want, we have to honor every relationship style, you know, like from monogamy to polyamory to relationship anarchy to solo polyamory to, you know, everything in between.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that it's important that, like I said, you know, so much of how we move in relationships is very compulsory.
Yeah.
You should do this because you're this. You should do this because you're my daughter. You should do this because you're my friend. You should do this because you're my girlfriend. And a lot of it is not very conscious and intentional, to where it's like, no, I'm doing this because I want to. I'm doing this because this is genuinely how I want to be in relationship with you. So I like that it caused me to have to do that work. And like I said, and then it just kind of bled out into, how do I want to be in relationship with my kids? How do I want to be in relationship with my family? How do I want to be in relationship with my friends? How do I want to be in relationship with all humans, that I come into contact with? What do I want to be able to say at the end of the day? What are my principles? What are my values? What are my ethics? And I think it's important that we have those conversations with ourselves, which I think this would be a good place to switch gears.
Okay.
So now we can talk about your book, because I think this is a good point to change that, because this is one of those elements is, because so much of what we hear, especially in the context of monogamy, is that, if I am not the architect, or if I don't hold the trademark, on my partner's joy, that I should feel uncomfortable about that. I want to be the sole designer, of their joy, the sole source of it. And when they get it from other places, other people, other humans, in similar ways that I give it to them, or in different ways, that's something that I should feel threatened by, that I should feel upset about, that I should try to limit, that I should make my partner feel bad about. And so compersion turns that idea on its head and says, no, I'm actually going to experience joy. I'm going to be excited. I'm going to be happy and encouraging of this. And so I'm really, really curious as to what made you choose this as the topic for your dissertation. I think that's such an interesting choice.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. And I just love how you framed this, like idea of like flipping our whole paradigm on its head, our paradigm being just built on, like private property and ownership of people. And really, when I started my PhD in East-West psychology in San Francisco in 2014, I didn't know I was going to study compersion specifically, but I knew that the idea of relationship diversity to me felt like an elephant in the room in our larger society in America, where I live, but also even in my micro cultures that were very progressive. Like I went to a very progressive university. People studied psychedelics, they studied altered states of consciousness, they studied meditation, they studied all kinds of alternative things, but almost no one was talking about relationship diversity. People were still operating in a default of monogamy or serial monogamy. And that never landed well to me. Like I just have a lifetime of feeling uncomfortable with mononormativity, with that assumption that monogamy should be the only valid or morally sound way to create intimate relationships. So I knew I was going to study something in terms of non-traditional relationships. So in 2014, I went to a conference that was called The Future of Monogamy and Non-Monogamy in Berkeley. And I encountered the word compersion for the first time. And I got so excited because this light bulb went on. I just felt like, oh, that is the kind of love that I want to give and receive in all of my relationships. Like I want my friends and my lovers and my partners to feel like they want to empower me to be the fullest version of who I am with as many resources as I can get, really. And I want to do the same for them. I want to empower other people. I want to be a cheerleader. I want to be on their team to really get what they want out of life, or all they can out of life. And that felt so much more congruent as a philosophy of love than the kind of philosophies I had heard before, the models that I had seen before. So I just kind of went on to try to research it, and I saw that there was absolutely no research on compersion. So that was crazy. I mean, there was actually I'm lying. There was like less than 5 studies. So it was very, very small, and I just really wanted to go. That's another aspect of my personality. I like to do things that are a little bit unscripted, where there isn't already a lot. Because it felt both like, mysterious and also like a lot of potential to contribute something of value to the literature on relationships and on non-monogamy, because that seemed like a very, very significant topic personally and academically.
I love that. And so this question, I have a couple of questions, but this one just popped forward for me as you were talking. What was most surprising for you about your research?
Well, the one thing that was surprising is that people came from all kinds of backgrounds. I think we have, especially like being in California, we always hear the stereotype of like, oh yeah, polyamorous relationships are this hippie coastal California thing, like no one does this who is a Republican or, like someone who lives in different parts of the country or, who are on different socioeconomic statuses, different racial backgrounds. But when I started doing my call for participants, I just saw that there was a lot of people from different backgrounds, and some people were coupled for decades and they had opened a relationship, and some people were solo poly. So that was kind of my first foray also into like different kinds of non-monogamy and learning to name them. Even though I had been in different non-monogamous relationships, I had never really encountered all the language around it. So it was very educational. And then in terms of my research results, I think the most surprising and poignant thing was discovering that compersion is not just an emotion. I think, every other definition I had encountered before of compersion was always like, well, it's a positive feeling. It's empathic joy. It's when you feel really good when your partner is with someone else. But then when I started asking my participants, like, what is compersion for you? A lot of people said, well, it's a cognitive realization that my partner's other relationships are a positive event. Or it's kind of an orientation that I have towards my relationship. It's like this background atmosphere in my relationship that, yes, we're going to support each other when we go out with someone else. So it wasn't always an emotional thing. And I think that's so cool that I found that in my research, because it can free people up from feeling bad if they're not feeling compersion emotionally. And I have a whole chapter in my book about the distinction between attitudinal compersion and embodied compersion. Embodied compersion being more of this emotional reaction, and the attitudinal one being more cognitive.
I love that because, in my conversations with you was where I even articulated that for myself in a way that I just hadn't, even though it was a way that I had been operating for a while, but I hadn't, put language to it because it just, the question just never came across my desk to have to form the answer. But, I was aware that, there was a difference between compersion, the feeling, and compersion, the ethic.
Yeah.
So saying, I am going to, because often people will say, well, compersion is the opposite of jealousy. And I'm like, you can feel compersion and jealousy at the same time, So like they don't cancel the other out. So, and I often find myself feeling at once happy about the things that my partners have going on with other people, and also a little bit threatened, a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit, scared or whatever, like often that's happening for me simultaneously. And so, I recognize, and as a person who like didn't just naturally have compersion, the compersion was definitely a thing that I had to develop throughout the course of my journey. It was going, how am I showing up in such a way so that my partners feel supported by me to have their relationship agency? Yeah. And that they know that overall, even if I'm feeling uncomfortable, my overall desire is that they feel free to be themselves. They feel free to make the choices that they want to make, and that they're supported by me in doing that thing, even if it makes me uncomfortable at times. And so for me, compersion is very much about, I'm going to make sure that I at least have compersion, the ethic, in place and functioning. And sometimes I have the feeling, and when I have the embodied, experience of it, great. And when I don't, I have these principles, these ethics that I can reach to, when my feelings are just not online. I'm like, okay, but how do we want to behave? What do we want to say? How do I want to show up? And so I really like that we're having a more nuanced conversation about compersion, because so much of the polyamorous discourse is like, it's this like pinnacle emotion, and it's the gold, standard of polyamory. And there's this like almost like I said, there's the haves and the have-nots when it relates to compersion. And I'm always like, come on, guys. Like, it's a lot more nuanced than that. So yeah.
Let's not create another division, another hierarchy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I also often find too that for people that actually naturally experience it and they experience compersion, they feel like it's an advantage, and in some ways it is. But I also say this too: you will inevitably encounter an experience where you do not feel compersion, and people that feel compersion naturally, just like, oh, I'm so compersive. When those things happen, they struggle.
Yeah.
Whereas like the people that have learned to like hold on to their ethics, even when the feelings aren't online, I feel like they can be a lot more solid in their own way, because it's like, okay, I really feel very uncomfortable about this, but ultimately I want to support my partner. And so I have these tools that can, I can reach for even when my feelings are not online. So having this like ranking of, well, I feel compersion and you don't, I'm better than you. And I'm like, okay, until you get in a situation where you struggle to feel compersion, and now you're like really, really struggling with that. So I like, that we're having more nuanced conversations about it and sort of busting up that hierarchy, of the compersives and the not compersives. So,
Totally. And I'll say also that I learned so much about that in my coaching practice. Like it was one thing to do the research and to ask people who are self-selected as compersive about what helps them feel compersion or what doesn't. But then like as a coach, I get all people who are struggling with compersion, who, like are experiencing sometimes the dark side of, like people telling them or their partner telling them like, hey, you should feel more compersion for me. Or even themselves telling themselves like, hey, I need to feel more compersion because I'm not a good poly person. And I've encountered a lot of people who were kind of self-defined or self-identified compersive people who encountered those situations that was like, oh my God, what the fuck? Why am I so jealous right now in this situation? And what do I do with this? And yeah, I really want to say that a lot of my research just points to the fact over and over again that compersion is contextual. You might feel it in some contexts, and then if you're, in a different context, you will not feel it anymore, and vice versa. So it's not an innate quality. It's more of a contextual quality.
Now, I'm curious as to what your own experience with compersion is like. Like for me, it's definitely something that I had to develop. It did not come naturally at all. It was a way that I had to work towards. And I also want to say, number one, I'd like to stick this in there. It is not necessary for polyamory, like for healthy polyamory. So it really is not. If you never get to that bubbly feeling, like I said, if all you have is the ethic of just like, I'm going to be supportive of my partners, but this some of this makes me really uncomfortable, like you can still have healthy polyamory in there. So if you don't feel the need to develop it, that's entirely fine. I just wanted to develop it because I felt like it was important for me to make it an embodied thing. And to move towards, being more at peace and actually being more excited, and happy, for my partners, because I saw how the difference in how I behaved, not only how I behaved, but what my experience of polyamory was like, the difference in when I was, working towards feeling compersion and when I wasn't. And for me, it had value, to develop it. And so I'm curious as to like what your own experience was. It something that came natural to you? Whether it's something that you had to develop over time, like if you could go into that, I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, it's not something that necessarily comes naturally to me. I mean, depending on the context again. In some contexts, it might feel very natural. Like I had a partner who was a little bit needy with me. And I just felt like, wow, wouldn't it be great if he had another partner? Like we would have more space. And then he had another partner and we had more space. And I was very compersive. Right? And then I had a partner who was not very needy and I was sort of pining for his attention. And then when he had another partner, I felt like, well, you're going to take away the little attention you give me and split it with someone else. Like, that's not okay. Or, like that first reaction being that's not okay. But, like, of course, having to then like adjust my expectations and what I stood for.
Right.
Another situation where it was difficult was when there was secrecy, where,
Mm.
like things were not fully transparent. And then I could not experience compersion because I felt excluded rather than included in my partner's life. So I don't know if I'm a compersive person or not. It depends.
Oh, I resonate with that so hard. And I tell people that I said, it's very easy for me to be happy seeing someone serve someone a meal when I'm fed, But if I'm
Exactly.
hungry, I'm not going to feel as positive about someone else, that serves me also serving someone else. And I mean, it does cause you to challenge that scarcity mindset, that love is a thing that people only have a small quantity of, and they, and when they're doling it out to others, your piece of the pie gets smaller. And so it does challenge that scarcity of going, I'm going to experience joy that this person is sharing their love with someone else, because there's enough love to go around. But the reality is there isn't enough time to go around. Like, there isn't
True.
enough financial resources to go around, or just actual, energy, mental, emotional energy. Those things are finite resources. And often when we're not receiving the relationship experience that we want to have with someone, compersion is hard to come by. And that's okay. And I think that's another piece of compersion that is not often talked about. It's such this thing that you're just supposed to feel at your partner's interactions with the other people. But if you're not feeling fulfilled in that relationship, or like you said, your partner's being secretive, they're not, honoring whatever agreements that y'all have come to about your relationship, et cetera, it's going to make compersion harder to experience, because, you're not enjoying your relationship experience with the person. So it's hard to show up for them enjoying their relationship experience with someone else. And in those moments, for me, those are the moments when that ethics piece comes online, where I'm like, okay, like, what are our ethics? Our ethics are such that, we want to support, this person having their relationship agency. And that does not mean that I don't address what's happening in our relationship, so I can bring our relationship to a place of, satisfaction and fulfillment once again. But I'm still not going to try to accomplish that by attacking what they have going on with someone else, or causing a lot of issues about what they have going on with someone else, because that is not in line with my compersion ethics.
Yeah. And I always say, use compersion or the lack thereof as a flashlight to look at what are the blocks to it. That can be such an interesting tool to look at, okay, why is my love not flowing there? What's happening, and can I address it? Another place where I've been really confronted sometimes with my struggles with compersion are my friendships, not just my intimate relationships. But for example, I have a good friend who actually has a relationship that I would perceive as oh my gosh, she has the ideal relationship. And I've been experiencing envy towards her. And I've been noticing sometimes oh, my heart wanting to close, and even sometimes judgments towards her coming up, not because of who she is, but because of what I perceive that she has that I don't. And that is so interesting to look at, how the mind works and how it creates division and separation and even judgment sometimes, because it feels a sense of scarcity. And I think, to bring it back to well, it is not just about non-monogamy. It's about all our relationships and how we approach our relationships. We can all practice compersion in our life, even in friendships. I think that's such a great place. And what does it mean to be a friend, after all? Even when I do feel envious or triggered, or that flashlight of the struggle with compersion illuminates a part of me that's freaking out, because I'm I want something that this person has. Okay, then is there anything I can do to bring myself closer to that thing that I want? Or can I make my love bigger, towards that person, so that it doesn't feel oh, because this person has this, I can't have it? Because usually that's, it's not really a zero-sum game in most situations.
Yeah, I had a friend once talk about envy, I was sharing something. I was feeling envious of someone who had attained some goal, that they had bought a house. It was a friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine. They had bought a house.
Yeah.
And I felt very envious of them. And, you know, I think we demonize the emotions of jealousy and envy a lot of times because of the ways in which people have behaved, you know, being propelled by those emotions, which I do understand. But they are just normal human emotions. And just because someone is feeling jealous or envious doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want you to have the thing or they're actively working against you. Usually what it's highlighting is something inside themselves that feels insecure, that either they can't have it, or they don't know how to attain it, or they wish they had it, or it points to some vulnerable point of longing, you know, inside them. And so, like I said, my friend had bought a house, and, you know, I was feeling, you know, a little envious, which was funny because I've never really desired to really own a home. Like, I'm kind of a nomad type person, you know. So it was something that, you know, like, I was like, why am I feeling, you know, envious of this? This isn't something that I wanted to do. And I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and she was saying that, you know, she's learned to use envy as, like you said, a flashlight to kind of go, you know, there's something here that I value, something here about this situation that I desire, that I want for my own life, and using it as like a way to steer her towards, you know, her desires and, like, you know, her values, you know, using it as like a you know, tool, like a homing, you know, device. So I'm feeling envy. You know, where is this trying to direct me towards something that I want? And, you know, what I discovered, you know, is it wasn't really that I wanted to buy a house. What I was actually, you know, feeling envious around was her. It felt like her capability to buy a house was signaling that she had, like, reached a level of maturity and development for her life that, like, I was still struggling to find, and I, you know, had never experienced. And so that was making me feel like, you know, kind of less than. And, like, she was more mature, or she was more, you know, grown up, you know, she was a better adult, you know, than I was. And so, and so, you know, I've learned that when I choose to get curious, kind of like you said, use these emotions, even as uncomfortable as they are, and as much as we want to get rid of them, we're like, you know, usually envy, jealousy come up, and you're like, okay, how do I get rid of this? But instead of going, like, how do I use this as a catalyst for self-discovery, you find it illuminates, you know, some very interesting things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I didn't think this research on compersion was going to lead us there. But, you know, like, now that I think about it, like, what's the point of this? You know, I mean, of course, there's a big point in terms of non-monogamous relationships and creating a map to more harmony and more cohesiveness and more, like, how do we be on the same team in non-monogamy? But I think it goes beyond that. I think it is, in a way, like that flashlight tool, and that tool for self-discovery and self-healing.
Now, I want to ask you, like, what role do you think compersion plays in, like, this future of relationship diversity, which is, you know, kind of what we're talking about? You know, why is it important? Why does it matter?
Well, number one, I think that compersion can throw a wrench in the wheels of mononormativity, because I think mononormativity is usually defended with the argument that, well, if you have intimacy beyond the couple, all you're going to call upon yourself is suffering. It's going to be jealousy, it's going to be grief, it's going to be a breakup. You know, like, there's this kind of myth that non-monogamy doesn't work because all you can feel is jealousy if your loved one is going to be with someone else. So to just document compersion, to just, like, have empirical research that says, yes, people are experiencing that. People are saying this and that about it. In a way, like, it just kind of throws a wrench in that argument that non-monogamy just leads to suffering. So I think it's a very big tool in dismantling mononormativity and creating a world where we have relationship diversity as a value, just like we have sexual diversity and, you know, like, sexual orientation diversity and religious diversity, et cetera, as a value. I think relationship diversity is, I don't know, a few decades behind the LGBTQ movement. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
What do I feel like Yeah, I do actually, because even in the LGBTQ community, like some of the responses to non-monogamy, I'm always like, whoa, guys. like they can be very, very anti non-monogamous frameworks. And I'm like, wow, like you would think, in a community where there has been so much censure around the relationships, that there would be a lot more openness around, like, okay, I don't want to do that, but like, yo, if you want to do that, that's cool. But even in the LGBTQ community, like you just mentioned that you're non-monogamous, and it's like, so that mononormativity runs a very, very, very deep. Even in communities where you would think that there would be a lot more progressive mindsets around relationships. Sometimes I find that there isn't.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, why do you think that is? Do you think that mononormativity just kind of hits a different nerve for people?
I think it does. I think also that there is some like security in being in line with the dominant culture. And especially when you talk about LGBTQ relationship, it's like we already have so much scrutiny, we already have so much censure. We're already, looked at as a pariah, looked at as deviant, etc. Why do we want to invite more of that into our relationship space, by now, incorporating non-monogamy into that space. So I think that even in LGBTQ relationships, there is still this desire to have some layer of conformity as a protective measure. I also think that mononormativity is just a very deep-seated script. And regardless of whether or not you're heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual, bisexual, really, to me, what mononormativity or, monogamy, like sort of connects to is that like safety and security around, like, if this person chooses only me, like I feel safe and secure, and if I open it up for them to interact with others in that way, where is my specialness? Where is my security? How do I ensure that this person is going to continue to choose me? And not go off with someone else. And, to me, regardless of whatever your sexual orientation is, you can feel that. To me, that's more of a human thing, and not necessarily something that has to do with, who you happen to be, involved with.
Right. Yeah. And what you just said, it's very congruent with my whole chapter on social positionality in compersion, because if I have to summarize it, it is that people with marginalized identities might go one of two ways in terms of non-monogamy. Either they are more likely to reject non-monogamy because they don't want to lose yet one area of privilege, because that definitely, can be harder if you're already marginalized because you're gay or Black, or you're a lower, you don't have as much money, you're already marginalized for one thing, you can't afford to lose another area of privilege. Or maybe you go the other way and you're like, well, fuck that, fuck the mainstream, patriarchal, heteronormative, white supremacist norm. It's already been against me, so let's just dismantle all the other areas of oppression, including mononormativity. And I found that there's two factors that tend to mitigate that tends to kind of maybe like determine whether a person will go one way or the other. One is the presence of supportive community around non-monogamy. If people have access to non-monogamous communities, they're more likely to embrace it. And also the kind of willingness to think independently.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I think that is something that anybody of any relationship style can actually benefit from. I remember one time I had a client once who was in a relationship with a non-monogamous person. And she herself did not identify as non-monogamous, but what she said she found is that she often is attracted to non-monogamous people, not because she herself desires to be non-monogamous, but she struggles to find monogamous people that are moving through their relationships in a conscious way. and wanting to like have these like deeper sort of discussions about how we're in relationship with one another. You know, there's so much baked in expectation in mononormativity, and we sort of go into these monogamous relationships just assuming that our partners want to do monogamy and relationships in the same way that we do, that they have the same ideas and definitions of what infidelity is, you know, that they have the same ideas of like what fostering intimacy is and what fostering passion is, and like, you know, how, you know, we want this relationship to set up and the role and the, you know, and there's not a lot of like really checking in with one another and going, what are my good friend Tikva Wolf, who actually illustrated my book, introduced me to, is what are our authentic overlaps? You know, how do we authentically overlap, and how do we want to be in relationship with one another? And so she was asking me, do you know of any like conscious monogamy circles where it's like, no, we don't want to, we definitely know that we want to be monogamous, just not like this, you know? We want to be monogamous, but not like this. And that's that ability to think independently and go, you know, and if you see relationships and the entirety of like how you can be in relationships, it's like this vast menu. You know, what am I putting on my plate that is indicative of what I actually want to eat, you know? And not just something that I'm slopping on my plate because someone's saying, okay, yeah, you need to have greens, you need to have vegetables, you need to have a starch, you know? But it's like, do I really want to eat this? You know, do I really want to share this meal with this person? These things that we have on this plate of our relationship, you know, are these the dishes that we both chose together that we both want to share and eat with one another, you know? And that ability to sort of think independently and make those determinations is so vital, regardless of what relationship model you're practicing.
Absolutely.
So we have a few minutes left. I know I just saw in the chat that there aren't any questions. I know you mentioned that you wanted to read an excerpt from your book, which I would love.
Okay.
If you have one. So yeah, if you would signal one out.
Yeah, I would love to read a little excerpt, and then maybe we can transition to questions after that. So the excerpt that I chose is compersion as an expression of romance, because that's another thing I didn't talk about at the beginning when you asked me why I wrote this book.
Hang on, I'm gonna write that down. That set off a light bulb in my mind. What did you say? Compersion as what?
An expression of romance.
Woo! That's a good one. Okay.
That's literally my favorite part, because, you know, I'm a sappy romantic. Like, I'll just
Me too. That's why when I heard that, I was like, oh my God. Okay.
And I think culturally, we don't think about, non-monogamy as, you know, or compersion or your partner being with someone else as particularly romantic. It doesn't fit our preconceived ideas about romance. Like, it's not a Hollywood movie. It's not a Disney movie. But I asked one of my participants, you know, about this, about how he felt about compersion. So let me actually read you the whole little section here. So, my writing. While the traditional romantic paradigm centers jealousy and possession as a main feature of passionate love, folks in my study found that giving their partner what they really want, including the encouragement to fulfill one's intimate desires with others, was a romantic stance of the highest order. They saw taking pleasure in their partner's pleasure as a gift of devotion and deep love. Tyrone, a 38-year-old facilitator, described compersion as romance joy or romantic joy. And now I'm going to read you the quote from Tyrone, which is a pseudonym. It's not his real name. But he said, "I love that compersion is romantic. I feel this level of romance joy. That's like romantic joy. I would do anything for you. And I get to see that you're getting this thing that I know you want, and I love to see you in bliss and pleasure. I love to see that, and I love to witness that. It's a level of intimacy and connection and partnership. It's just like if my partner says, I like flowers, and I bring them flowers once in a while. If their desire is to be tied up and have a guy or a girl present and play with them, to me, it's the same thing. It's like, I'm going to give you the thing that I know you enjoy, because that's how I show my love, by intentionally giving you what you actually want, what gives you joy, the things that you desire in your life. I want to give that to you because I'm your partner.
Yeah, that I'm gonna sit with. I'm gonna be journaling. I'm gonna be sitting with that because I had a very somatic emotional response to it. It really almost brought me to tears. And it actually reminded me of a story. And I'm gonna read an excerpt from my book. I was like, oh, because I hadn't picked one before this. I just kind of grabbed the book and hadn't picked one.
Nice.
But you bringing this up reminded me of a story from my my marriage and a situation that happened with my my former, my ex-husband. So I'm going to read this, but
great.
And it's our partners being jealous or envious of our interactions with others can sometimes feel as if they don't want us to have joy or good things. However, the feelings usually aren't personal to us and say more about how they feel about themselves. In my marriage, I was the one who struggled with jealousy. My husband did not, and it was baffling to me. One evening, I asked him why he never seemed to experience difficult emotions around my interactions with others. His response made me cry. He asked, why would he feel badly or be upset about me receiving more love and happiness in my life? He wanted me to have as much love as I could get. I cried because it helped me to understand why my jealousy and envy was so hurtful to him. It made him feel as if I didn't want him to have joy or pleasure or happiness. That was never the case. I wanted him to have all those things, but him receiving them from others made me feel badly about me. I wanted to be happy for him, but I didn't know how to when I was feeling so bad. My expressions of jealousy often look like I didn't care about his experience. Try not to take your partner's jealousy personally. It's usually not about what they don't want you to have. It's not about you at all, really. It's about what's going on inside of them. And I ask the question, do you take your partner's feelings of jealousy or envy personally? How does their jealousy feel personal to you? So I love that idea of compersion as a form of romance. This is how I love you. This is a way that I'm going to show up and be in romantic love with you. Is not only am I going to love you, but I'm going to love the love that you get, even if it doesn't have anything to do with me, as an expression of my romantic love for you. That to me is a very revolutionary concept, and one that I really, really, really am going to sit with because I definitely... in this later portion of my life and in my relationships, I've been on sort of a compersion experiment recently. I have, and it's been very illuminating, and it has felt like showing up and deepening my appreciation for my partner's interactions with others. It has felt kind of romantic. It has felt like a way that I'm romancing them. Which is very interesting. So you saying that was really, really, really resonant for me. But we have a couple of questions here in the chat, so I don't want to, time get away. So the first question is, and I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll answer, is can you share a personal tool in your toolbox for when struggling with compersion?
Okay, so my answer to that is to get closer to the person that I might be jealous or envious of. Like, for example, if I'm jealous of my partner's relationship with a particular metamor, and if it's available to me to be, closer to that metamor, usually it helps dispel the jealousy, because the jealousy oftentimes will kind of rest on romanticizing somebody and unrealistic ideas about who they are. And the more I can humanize them, and the more I can actually foster my own love and care for them, then the more compersion I'm likely to feel. So get closer rather than further away.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I remember an old acquaintance of mine told me something once that I've carried to this day. And they said this far more eloquent. I've never been able to recreate it in the way that they said it, but it was a light bulb, like a lightning moment for me. And they said that, they're feeling uncomfortable, then what it is that they need to do is bypass the urge to withdraw, which is usually that first urge, and instead to reach out, because the affirmation of the connection that they have with their partner is what they actually need, and the withdrawal is going to actually strengthen the disconnect that they're feeling. And so similarly to, like you said, that compersion piece, that tool of how do I get closer to this thing that is I'm actually feeling this sort of withdrawal and repellency from, as a way to manage these difficult emotions that I'm having is such a great tool. So one that came forward for me was gratitude. Choose gratitude. Like, gratitude first has been a game changer for me in my non-monogamy. Especially, I remember, I'm going to tell a story. I was at a party one time, and there was like a former lover there at the party of mine, and like a current lover. We were like at the same party, and they know each other. And there was a moment where the two of them were dancing with one another. And I was feeling so uncomfortable. I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so uncomfortable about this. And I like, you had this brief, like, kind of freak out moment of they're going to like each other. And then they're going to, I'm like, going through my mind at the time. And I chose, I was like, okay, how can I have gratitude, in this moment? And I'm like, here are these two humans that I find incredibly attractive. Like, and I'm getting to witness them dancing with one another. It's this beautiful sight. They both had these huge smiles on their faces. They were clearly enjoying each other. And, I'm not saying that it completely dispelled the uncomfortable feelings, but it definitely gave me something else to feel. Besides just all of this discomfort. And I was able to just enjoy, that I got to watch these two people that I'm like really turned on by, interacted with each other. And it was able to help me sort of ride that wave of the discomfort emotions. And so gratitude is such an all-purpose tool in life. It really, really is. Like,
totally. Yeah. And, I used to think that gratitude was such a boring concept, or I just, sometimes you hear people like
rote. It's very rote.
Write in your journal, like, name one thing you're grateful for. Like, it sounds rote, but then I started doing it about a year ago, like just giving gratitude at the end of the day, and it literally changed my life.
It really is. Gratitude is such an all-purpose tool. It really is. So we have another question. How can I balance my partner's triggers with my needs in non-monogamous relationships? And so I'm assuming that it's, how do I balance sort of supporting or being aware of my partner's triggers and caring for them while also holding on to and maintaining my autonomy, which is a delicate balance, let me just say. I think, for one, to me, the first thing is I understand that I am responsible to my partner's feelings, but I'm not responsible for them, And so I feel like, as a person who cares about the people in my life, I do have a sense of responsibility to my partner's feelings, in that I don't want to be unnecessarily causing them angst and pain if I can avoid it. But I am not responsible for that, and not in such a way to where I am now self-sacrificing, and I am not being in authenticity to myself and what I want to do and how I want to be in relationship and the things that I want to engage in, what I want my relationship experience to me. So to me, the first thing is I need to figure out what that is for me. The things that I absolutely know that I'm willing to do to respond to and to meet my partner's triggers, and the things that I'm not. I need to know that what those things are first and foremost. And then once I have a pretty firm grasp of what those things are, I communicate what those things are so that I set reasonable expectations. This is what you can, come to me and expect in terms of support. And this is what you can't, these are things that I'm not willing to do. And then I, make sure that I stick to what those things are. I also encourage my partners to be well-resourced. I should not be the sole source of support that you have around your triggers, et cetera, so forth and so on. And I also encourage them that, like, hey, I absolutely want to show up and be supportive of these things. And if there are things that I can do to help you feel cared for as you're navigating your healing, because, I would like to hope, that they're on a healing journey, with those triggers. And so, or if there are things that I can do and that I'm willing to do to support your healing around those things and support your care around those things, I absolutely will. But also, I am going to, that should be in conjunction with you doing your own work to navigate and manage those things, because, like I said, I am not responsible for them. And so to me, like I said, the first piece of that is, making sure that you are very secure in what your boundaries are, what you do and don't want to do, that you're communicating those things to your partner so that you can level set their expectations, and that you are also, supporting their own efforts to meet their own triggers and heal from those things, so that way they don't have this expectation that you're actually supposed to kind of dance around them. How would you answer that question?
I don't think I can add anything. That was such a beautiful answer, Evita. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I mean, really like discerning what are flexible needs versus inflexible needs. Just to rephrase kind of what you already said, like things that you're willing to do, things you're not willing to do is such a great start.
Thank you. So question 3 is it believed that when one faces their own jealousy and work on it, they increase their self-authenticity? That's an interesting. I've never even actually heard that posited, as an idea. I think that any work that we do to, actually, this is what I'll say to that. Jealousy is a remarkable tool for self-discovery. If you change your relationship to it. I used to have a series of content that I called My Jealousy, My Friend.
Yeah.
And we never think of jealousy as a friend emotion. But jealousy is a friend emotion for me. It's extremely uncomfortable when it shows up. But it is a friend emotion. I've learned that jealousy is a friend and not an enemy. And so I tell people when jealousy shows up on my doorstep, kind of like that Rumi poem, the guest house, So when jealousy shows up on my doorstep, I open the door and I'm like, all right, come in, sit down, have a cup of coffee, because I know it has something to tell me, it's a friend emotion. And so when we do the self-work to get to know the messages that our jealousy is giving to us, what I find happens is I do become a lot more self-aware and a lot more, I gain a lot more self-knowledge. And to me, self-knowledge and more deeper a sense of authenticity just go hand in hand. Because you can't be authentic if you don't know who you are, like, you really can't. The two are, they're not, mutually exclusive. So to me, I do think that when you face your own jealousy and you allow it to speak to you and you allow it to teach you about who you are, then, more authenticity is just a byproduct because you have a much deeper self-knowledge.
Amazing. Yeah, I would add, like an analogy that sometimes I'll give to my coaching clients is if you're encountering your jealousy for the first time, really in the context that you're in, imagine that you are gaining access to a room in your house that you didn't know was there. Maybe there's a room where you didn't go for 20 years and all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, like there's this room here, and you enter and there's cobwebs everywhere and there's dirt and it feels uncomfortable and you're like, well, what the fuck is this? But if you actually take time to be there and start cleaning things up and discovering the space that's there, you're going to gain more access to your house. You're going to gain more access to yourself. So you can gain so much freedom.
Yeah, it illuminates a lot that is shadow. And that is so powerful. Because a lot of what gives shadow so much power is that we don't know who we are in the dark, you know, which is why shadow can be such a powerful tool, because we don't know ourselves in it. We don't know what's there. And so, the jealousy, it illuminates those shadow parts of ourselves. And, not everything that we see there is, like you said, it's not going to be cleaned up. A lot of it's going to be in disrepair. It's going to be dirty. It's going to be, cobwebs, these areas of ourselves that we've ignored because they were too uncomfortable or too painful or scary. But, when we turn and face those things and put light on those things and begin to do the work to clean those areas up, like you said, we gain more access to ourselves. Or the way I talked about this recently, if you think about like the Lion King, that part, that scene in the Lion King where like Simba or Mufasa's talking to Simba, he's like, everything that the light touches, is our kingdom. We have dominion over it.
Yes.
So it's adding more light to your kingdom. You have more dominion. So those shadow areas where my jealousy illuminates, those are areas, in the shadow realm that there's no light. But if there's no light, the light doesn't touch that. I don't have no reign. I have no dominion over it. It's still working. in my life, you know, but I don't have any reign and I don't have any dominion over it. And so when I bring light to those areas, when I expand, I had something happen recently to where I had this like deep awareness, and it literally felt like I gained more access to myself. Like I could feel this expansion inside of my mind and inside of my heart. And it was because, you know, I gained more light kingdom, you know, more dominion. So I really like that idea of more access to myself, more dominion. So that was great. Fantastic. And then the last question 4 we have is, what advice do you have for people interested in polyamory, non-monogamy, or just starting out exploring? I'll let you take that first.
Well, I would say start with 2 things. 1, start reading books like our beautiful books. Just to start getting your mind ready for a new paradigm of relationships. You know, we have a lifetime of hearing from books and movies and TV shows and music that there's only one way to love, and that's monogamous love. And it's important to just start expanding your mind to different stories, different paradigms. And the other thing in that realm would be to go for like a poly-hour cocktail meetup group in your area. Like, just go start meeting people who are non-monogamous so that you can normalize it. You can start looking at, you know, does this sound like super foreign and super like, oh no, I would never want to do that? Or does it seem like, oh yeah, actually I can see myself doing that, and these are people like me who have normal emotions like me, and just kind of learn from other people. Like, the power of community cannot be overstated. And for those of you watching maybe who are like, well, I live in a rural area, I can't just, you know, like go take a subway ride to like a poly cocktail hour. There's also great online communities. Our friends Emma and Finn run a community called Normalizing Non-Monogamy. It's $5 a month, and people have online conversations about non-monogamy, and it's a really great way to get started and get some, you know, feedback and friendship and support.
I love that, because literally every newbie that I come across, that's like one of the first things that I tell them. And so many people coming into non-monogamy focus on gotta find partners, and I'm like, no, you need to find you some friends. Okay, get you some community. Because by far the relationships that have stood the test of time as I become non-monogamy have been the friendships that I've made. My partners have come and gone. Not a single partner that I had starting non-monogamy do I have now. Okay, I'm not with my husband anymore. All, you know, partners that I've had along the way. I do have a partner now. We've been together for 5 years, and that's not to say that polyamory does not work. It does, but friendships. Get yourself some community. Get yourself some friendships. You know, go into this with the idea that I'm just going to learn, because it is. I always tell people that non-monogamy is a becoming. Unless you're like a first generation, second generation, to where like, you know, this is what you grew up with, which does happen. But that's rare, you know. It's becoming a little bit more common, you know, like my children are now, you know, you know, that's their vantage point. But like, you know, that wasn't mine. But, you know, non-monogamy it's a becoming. It's an undoing and a becoming. It's a breaking down and a building back up. It's a throwing out of all of these antiquated relationship scripts that we have, and then sitting down and rewriting new ones that are custom to who you are and how you want to be in relationships. Also, you know, work on your flexibility, being flexible as a human being, because, you know, your ideas are going to change. Who I was in monogamy, not monogamy 10 years ago is definitely not who I am now, not even close. Not even a little bit. What I thought I wanted when I first got into non-monogamy is very, very different from what I want today. And, you know, being flexible and not holding on so rigidly to, you know, the ideas. I want things to look this way. This is how I want us to be, you know, in relationship with one another. But being able to be flexible, get curious before you get upset, get curious, develop your curiosity about emotions. So when you feel uncomfortable emotions, instead of your response to it being like, oh no, I got to figure out how to get rid of this or whatever, going, oh wow, that's uncomfortable. What the heck is that about? You know, learning how to sit with uncomfort, sit with discomfort, and with a scholar's mind, you know, allowing it to teach you I'm telling you, like, I can't stress that enough, is become a student of your discomfort. Become a student of your discomfort. Because there's so much wisdom there, so much to gain.
I love that so much. Well, how did we do, Lori?
I think it's incredible, and judging from the comments, A+. I do have one last question I wanted to ask before you guys would go. And Rewilding Souls asks, are there any upcoming polyamory conferences or retreats that you would recommend?
So Midwest Love Fest is coming up. I think it's a day conference, and I believe it's sometime in the fall or like early, like late summer. So August, September, October time. I know that's coming up. I know there's also Sex Down South. That's another conference that comes up in the fall. That one's in Atlanta. And a lot of educators and, you know, say, and that one's a more like a broad. So there's kink, you know, there's a lot just around the concepts of sex and relationships. That one is coming up. And so those are the two that I can think of off the top of my head. I don't know if you know of any, Marie.
Also, the Normalizing Non-Monogamy folks are having a retreat in September in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. So I don't have the exact dates, but if you go onto Normalizing Non-Monogamy community, you'll find it there.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. If everyone at home could give them a round of applause to Evita and Marie. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for tuning in and helping make the program what it was. We hope to see you next time on the next Busboys and Poets Books Presents, and I'm sure we'll be seeing Evita and Marie back sooner than later. Thank you both so much, and happy Disability Pride Month. I wanted to put that out there, and a big shout out to our ASL interpreter, Billy Sanders. Thanks so much, everyone at home. Peace and love from us here at Busboys and Poets Books.